Walking into Dragon's Dogma 2, I had no preconceived notions of the game other than a few trailers that I'd seen over the last year, and with nothing really else coming out, I figured I'd drop the $70 and give this game a shot. Early on, and from the trailers, I got a heavy Skyrim vibe to this game. The setting of the world looked like a high definition version of Skyrim brought to realization. Don't get any ideas, Todd. The scope and the scale of this world is often something that I would compare to that of Death Stranding, actually. While that might seem a little odd comparison, I equate it to how I would feel from trekking way across the landscape, only to look back and see the place where I started my journey off in the horizon. The sense of scale and exploration, the high that you get from going deeper and deeper into a cave, wondering if the next turn will result in your death, or the faint hint of light shining through your way out. Unpredictable nature of this game is what I love, and it also really frustrates me at sometimes. There's a lot of things going against you and the player, but it's also part of the charm and the reason I came to really enjoy my time with this game. But there is also a considerable amount of bullshit that is weighing this game down, and I think it's best we talk about that here at the top.
Your will. That's at last this world might.
Hold fast to your strength of will, Arisen One. Those who can be of aid to you will reveal themselves in time.
Thy will, thy soul. These are all the means thou hast to carve thy path anew.
So first off, I do want to talk about the technical performance of the game right now at the top because I'm sure plenty of you have heard about this right now. And firsthand, boy, is this PC port rough. Just for some context, I have an RTX 4080 and an i7 13700K. I built this system last year and it can handle literally any game I throw at it, max settings, no problem. Probably the worst one that I've had issues with is Jedi Survivor. And in terms of that was just a broken port and it didn't really run well for anyone until they got a few patches to solve that. And unfortunately, Dragon's Dogma 2 falls into that same category, and a lot of its issues lie within the main city or hub areas for me. These are places that anyone is going to experience massive frame dips, and it's not something that I could even escape. More often than not, you'll slowly start to see your frames go down and down as you get closer and closer to that city center or where there is a lot of NPCs moving around. And it sucks because you will be spending a lot of time in these cities early on when your quest, because that's where a lot of the missions and a lot of things are given out. As well, that's where you find your gear, your upgrades, your inns, where your hell, that's where your house is in Vernworth. Big bummer, and at least for me, the performance is greatly improved once I do start to leave any of those main settlement areas. And it did made me kind of dread going back to them, which is unfortunate because that's not something you want to think about when you're playing a game, is avoiding an area because of an issue it might cause. So if you do plan on picking the game up on PC, try to look at a video with someone that might have some similar specs to what you're running. I also want to mention the other hot button issues surrounding the game, and that is the inclusion of microtransactions. Now, this isn't the first time Capcom has done this, but it really seems like the first time, I guess, the general public and or Twitter has really caught wind of it or really made us stink our rise out of it. Because in fact, they've done it with past Resident Evil games as well as the Devil May Cry series, so it's really not anything new to Capcom's business practices in a sense. And see why people are upset because they do find them predatory or kind of disingenuous. But buying Rift coins in this game is not something that I think you need to do at all, considering you earn them at a pretty steady rate just from playing the game as you go. The Wake Stones, I could see that being beneficial, but once again, I really don't see a need to buy them when you're readily able to find them in the open world. Albeit it does take a little bit of grinding. There is an item you can find that reveals locations of Wakestone shards, and you only need to find 3 of those to make a full one. So there are ways to still earn them. It's just if you want to pay to have them right away, you can do that. The one that does bother me the most, I would say, is the port crystals, because these are essentially your fast travel points that you can go back and forth to across the map. But you have to use these things called keystones around the map. Well, the big thing about the game right now is, to my knowledge, there's only 2 permanent port crystals, I guess, in my first 45 hours that I found. So then you're really tasked with finding and placing them in the most optimal position for you or for maybe your farming runs or whatever you want to do. Because of the scarcity of acquiring the port crystals, you are then, I guess, inclined to maybe want to purchase more of them to set down on your journey. But for me, it just seems silly. So I've only placed the 2 that I have. Really, I would just put them where you find they would fit best or for your run. So, well, what I just mentioned above might turn off some players to the game. That choice is entirely yours to make. And if you do skip out, I do think you are missing out on a good game, but obviously there are still some issues and things that they need to work through. What the hell is Dragon's Dogma 2 even about? Well, you start out as a prisoner that is forced to work in a mining camp where one day you're freed from captivity when Medusa attacks your camp, killing most of the workers. You use this opportunity to escape and travel to the capital city of Vernworth. Upon being shot down, you land far away from the capital city, and you learn that you are someone with the ability to control pawns. The pawns are loyal servants to the one that they call the Arisen, who is said to have been born after a dragon defeated it and ate their heart. But there's someone on the throne who currently claims to be Arisen. So the main crux of the story early on and basically throughout the whole story essentially is you trying to prove that you are in fact the true Arisen. And yeah, that's basically the story. Now, I'm not gonna lie, a majority of this story for this game was something that sort of just flew over my head, or I really wasn't picking up everything that was being put down. A lot of names and words are thrown out, and half the time I was having issues remembering the names or some of the people that I had just talked to. You sadly don't get much depth with these characters or your pawns, as the pawns themselves are rotating out every few levels, and the characters, you really don't spend that much time with them. And there was just so much happening all at once that you really aren't quite able to make sense of it, or at least I wasn't early on. And you're going to be meeting people that you might think are one off side characters, but turns out they have an entire quest chain and romance option that I skipped out over. Sorry, Eureka. That is one of the more glaring issues that this game has, and it's a pretty poorly designed quest system and quest structure. Sometimes you will progress too far into the main story that a particular quest essentially becomes uncompletable, but still stays in your inventory. There's one early on where you have to deliver some plants to a girl in one of the first few cities, and I wasn't able to do it at the start, but I did some 20 hours later and came back, and she just is not anywhere standing in that location. I ran all around town, couldn't find her, didn't find any videos, so I unfortunately just kind of gave up and moved on. There is a funnier instance of this when I was supposed to meet a painter near this griffin's lair and I was supposed to help him. But when I got to the lair, I noticed that my health was a little low and decided to make a campfire and rest till the morning. Well, when I returned to the area where the painter was, I found his corpse and there was no griffin in sight. So I can assume while I wasn't present, the griffin had himself a little snack and ate the person. So it's little moments like this that I think are actually kind of funny to watch happen because without the presence of an autosave, you really aren't able to save scum if you make a mistake like that. And I can appreciate when a game does something to try to make my choices matter or have an impact on how that quest can play out. But you really have to be in the right mood to play this game, and I found that wasn't something I could just jump into on a whim. And the reason I say that is because when you make your way across these lands, you'll no doubtedly be pulled in many directions, whether that be your wandering eye as you spot a building on a cliff and you say, I wonder if there's anything up there, or following a quest line that takes you to a hidden elvish city that you can't understand a goddamn word that they are saying, or the phantom ox cart that comes along in the middle of the night to carry around wary pawns and you have to figure out how do I get on that. A lot of my enjoyment came from the journey to the places the story was taking me and not necessarily the story itself. I just didn't ever find a point or a moment in the story that made me want to keep going. Once I realized that a lot more of the enjoyable content and moments was going to be hidden out in the open world and not something that the game was going to lead you to, that was when the game as a whole really started to click for me. Not joking, at the 10 to 15 hour mark in this game, I was debating on trying to get a refund or not. I told myself that I need to stick with it, and goddamn am I glad that I did so. Because so far, this experience playing Dragon's Dogma 2 has been unlike any other game I had played in the past. Like I said earlier, I liken the traversal to the exploration of something like Death Stranding 2, which might seem a little odd, but it really is that sense of journey and exploration that I think both games have. And it's also what I think that makes them quite similar in many ways. When you're planning to make a trip in Death Stranding, you look over the equipment that you have. Do you need more fast ropes? Do you need a few ladders? Do you need more energy packs because you're making a longer run? You have to really all take into account for the route and the terrain that you're going to be going through. With Dragon's Dogma 2, it isn't exactly quite the same, but you still have to take into account the route that you're going to be taking, as well as what enemies you might encounter. Do you have the camping kits? How's your pawn system going to work out? Do you have a mage? These are all questions you have to sort of think about in the back of your mind when you're wandering around in the world because it's a pretty world to look at and explore, but it can also be quite deadly.
Now I've got you! I can't...
Changing out your weapons and your outfits are going to be a big part of this journey that you're going to be making across the lands. So, slowly, you're going to unlock better and more powerful weapons like any other RPG or most games nowadays. And how you obtain these weapons is going to be in many different ways. Some are going to be located in chests around the map that you find. You might need a particular key, or you just might need to find the chest itself. Others are only bought at certain vendors. Some vendors also only sell certain weapons. What weapons you're able to use are actually determined by the vocation that you select at the start of the game. Think of a vocation as your class, and only that class has access to a certain amount of weapons. Like a mage can't use an archer's bow, and an archer can't use a greatsword from the warrior. So it really does force you to take into account the other vocations in the game, as well as whether or not you want to decide to swap vocations for your pawn. Speaking of vocations, one of the first things that you will have done when creating your character is selecting what vocation that you're going to be running at the start. Now, don't let this choice seem too daunting because you aren't going to be locked into that class forever. In fact, it's actually encouraged for you to experiment and try out some of the other vocations in the game. At first, you're only going to have access to four very basic vocations: archery, mage, fighter, and thief. I went ahead with the mage class to start off, and this can seem a little weak at first, but once you're able to use it out in the wild and rank it up a bit, you can unlock some pretty cool spell casting abilities like the lightning strikes and the flamethrower ability. Those are the ones that I really gravitated towards at the start. And then when you also reach the main city of Vernworth, you do have the ability to unlock two further classes: the warrior and the sorcerer class. The warrior is going to be your beefed up version of the fighter, and the sorcerer is essentially the beefed up version of the mage class. And the sorcerer is what I thought the mage class was going to be. This is your offensive DPS sleeper that can sit in the back of the map, but still dish out a buttload of damage. They have one ability that allows you to attach this explosive bolt to a target, and the more times you hit that bolt, the more damage it does. And I love it. It's my method and my go to way of taking down bosses. Then there are also four other hidden vocations that you can find across the map through various quests, objectives, or just by exploring yourself. You have the Trickster, which can conjure up illusions through smoke created by its unique weapon, little smoke monsters and stuff. It's kind of cool to mess around with. Mystic Spearhand, that is arguably one of my favorite out of the four to run. It's a mix between a melee and a magic build, sort of with like a dual-bladed Darth Maul style lightsaber. Then we have the Magic Archer, which is this sort of cross hybrid class combining both archery and magic. And lastly, we have the Warfare class, and this is going to be your jack of all trades class, essentially allowing you to swap weapons in your inventory. And when you swap that weapon, you use the vocation for that weapon. So if you can inventory manage well enough, you can make this class work pretty effectively. In Dragon's Dogma 2, you aren't going to have a set cast of characters that is going to follow you throughout your journey, because one of the main aspects of being an Arisen is having control over the pawns in this dimension. Pawns are essentially NPCs that are created by the players or anyone that has played this game. Like I said, each person that has played this game will have created and selected a vocation for their pawn at the start. Just like the player character, you're going to be able to swap the vocation of your pawns at a guild master at any time, so don't worry about locking your pawn into one specific vocation. My base pawn started out as an archer, but over time moved them to the sorcerer class, even giving them all of my personal gear since I wasn't using the class at that time. And once you have your pawn selected and created, you will then be able to actually select two other pawns from a list of pawns that were created by other players. Once again, it really boils down to how you want the makeup of your party to look and what type of synergy you're going to have. I think a mage is going to be a staple in any party just because of the healing nature, so experiment with a few things, but definitely I would recommend taking a mage. The pawn system is pretty cool to see in action because you know that these characters are people that have been created by someone who is playing and exploring the same game that you are. When you always part ways with them, you can select a gift to give them as a token of appreciation. Now, this is a little tip: your main pawn does level up with you as you go, but your side pawns unfortunately do not. So keep that in mind when you're out in the wild, as you might want to swap those two around because I didn't learn about that until pretty later on. I will say one of the biggest things surrounding the pawns and what you're going to have to worry about the most with your pawn is something called Dragon's Plague. This is an illness that your pawn can contract when fighting dragons, and if left unchecked, it can derail an entire playthrough for some time. What this does is over time, your pawn will become unresponsive to commands that you give them and will be essentially just a giant asshole. And then when you go to take your next rest at the inn, the Dragon's Plague will take full effect, transforming that pawn into a dragon and killing the entire town that you are currently sleeping in. At the moment, there is no cure for this other than to chuck that pawn off the nearest cliff as fast as possible, or if it's not your main pawn, you can dismiss them and leave them for the next person to deal with. This is surely an interesting mechanic to an already complex and deep game, but I can see how this might royally piss someone off if an entire town was killed because of it. So if you hear your character mentioning the Dragon's Plague, or maybe they sound a little off, take a look at their eyes and make sure they aren't glowing red, and if they are, find the nearest cliff. I wanted to save the end game portion of the review for its own little section, as it really does separate itself off from the main game in a big way. So if you would not like to hear any spoilers for the end game of Dragon's Dogma 2, go ahead and skip to the timestamp that you see on the screen now. Sadly, I had some issues with my recording footage of the end game, so there isn't much variation in the gameplay, and the way that this game is built, I can't exactly load and go back to a previous save, so I do apologize if it's very boring or just stock footage, but it's the best I could do. Most of it's just going to be me talking over my experience of the end game itself. So once you've reached the last mission of the game, you're forced to confront the dragon that ate your heart at the very start of the game, and are faced with two options. One is where you walk away and become king of the lands as the true Risen, taking your place on the throne like in the opening cutscene, or you can face the dragon in one hell of a battle that had me sweating my ass off. After defeating the dragon, the same sort of scene plays out where you become king of the lands, but as the credits start to roll, you see the Pathfinder, this spectral figure that's been popping up throughout the game. After a few dialogue scenes with the Pathfinder, you are then teleported back to a scene where you're riding on the dragon's back before the final confrontation. Here you have to select the God's Bane blade from your inventory, using it on yourself where your heart once was, stunning both you and the dragon, dropping you into the brine. Upon waking up, you will realize that the entire map and the entire world around you has been changed and altered. Where there was water, it's gone, opening up whole new areas and paths to explore. But in this unmoored world, as they call it, you're running on a doomsday timer and only have 12 in-game days to complete all of your tasks or evacuate the world before it collapses. Now, at first, I was kind of confused as to why this type of endgame would exist in this game itself, but as you play, you'll learn that fairy stones and other rare materials are actually pretty common in this world. Worm life crystals are also plentifully abundant in this game mode, allowing you to unlock some of the best gear. There's also a good amount of story elements to this ending as well, and it's entirely up to the player, but they have choices of evacuating all the settlements from the respective towns they've visited, like Vernworth, Batal, and the Elder City, as well as two of the smaller settlements on the Volcanic Isles. If you've done enough side quests, a lot of these people you have already met previously, but others might take a little more convincing. All this is hastened by the fact that every couple days, the red fog around the map will slowly close in, engulfing the settlements if you don't extract them in time. And if you die at any time in this world, you'll be sent back to the very beginning of the unmoored world and be forced to redo everything that you just did. There are also some boss fights that you will have to do if you want to trigger that ending early, but there's also a few other things that you can do to stop the progress of that red fog, allowing you to explore the map to your heart's content. At first, I thought this was one of the dumbest ideas for an endgame loop, but as I sunk more and more time into it, and after dying the first time and losing a whole 2 hours of progress, I started to realize the risk versus reward of this endgame. Yes, materials and resources are going to be plentiful in this version of the world, but if you fuck up once in this mode, it's game over and you have to start all over again. So the game really forces you to consider each fight that you are in, because one wrong move and your entire run is over. Once you do complete the endgame quest, you are then treated to a cutscene showing that the world has sort of been reset, and you'll also see the people from the different side quests that you might have done. After this ending, you are able to then start up a New Game Plus run, allowing you to carry over your gear and all of your levels. So if you'd prefer to go into the end game and farm, that's something you can do, or you can jump right into the New Game Plus, start your run over again. While it was a bit confusing at first for me to understand the end game and the unmoored world itself, I could say it grew on me over time, and next time I go back, I'll be farming. As we begin to wrap it up, I can comfortably say that Dragon's Dogma 2 was one hell of a surprise for me. Like I said at the top, I thought it was just going to be more like Skyrim than anything else, and that wasn't even remotely close to the experience that I had while playing this game. The freedom and the world exploration are some of the best that I've ever experienced, and a lot of the time, you will have a goal or objective in mind, and more often than not, you're going to get sidetracked by a creature that attacked you, or a lone traveler that'll want to come away asking for help. Stuff like this is where I really think the game is at its strongest, while the quest design and the writing are the weakest parts in my opinion. They do an awful job at telling you what you should be doing for an objective, or how to even do some certain objectives. At a certain point, I just gave up trying to work them out, and I looked up a guide whenever I would get stuck or frustrated, because I wanted to enjoy and keep my progress moving forward in the game. The writing, I will say, isn't all that great in the main questline, except for sections or parts that deal with the dragon and the lore surrounding it, and there aren't too many memorable side characters, at least for me. The gameplay in Dragon's Dogma 2 carries it harder than any game that I've ever really played before, and the fact I can start fighting a griffin in one section of the map and hold onto its back and then ride it to a whole nother section of the map and continue that fight is just so damn cool, and it's really hard to put into words the feeling you have during an encounter like that. Now, at the end of it, Dragon's Dogma 2 is really one of the most mixed bag of games that I think I've ever played. So many times I was close to uninstalling, but I kept pushing, I kept going, because I knew that there was something there. Capcom made the best 8 out of 10 game in a long time, and a lot of what they're trying are things that they haven't necessarily done in the past, and I have to applaud them for that. But after playing the game for nearly 45 hours, I came away having enjoyed a majority of my time with the game. Yes, it has its ups and downs, but most games do. I think the whole microtransaction thing really does blow, and my time playing the game, I wasn't compelled or felt like I needed to buy them. Performance, on the other hand, is something that 2 weeks post launch is still in a pretty shitty state, and I really hope they can tighten that up because this game is special and deserves to be experienced without issue. All right, I know that was a long ass video, and I do appreciate you listening to me ramble. I just want to say, if you did make it this far, thank you for taking the time out of your day, and this has been my review for Dragon's Dogma 2. Thank you for watching.
Forth arisen. Follow thy heart to seek the truth.